So in this video we'll be seeing about user ID tracking. Now why do we need user ID tracking? So as you might know that when a person logs in from a browser, they are already given a client ID and that acts as their user ID for the time being. But then if they access the same website but on another browser, they will get a separate client ID because the session is different, right? Since it's on a different browser, so they'll get a different client ID. And now, even though it's the same user interacting with the same website, but since they are doing it on two separate browsers, they'll have two separate client IDs. So to track both of these as one, we'll assign them a singular user ID, right? So it will supersede the both the other client IDs, right? So that is why we need user ID tracking, because if suppose if even if they like open the site on their mobile browser and open the same site on the computer browser, still they'll be recognized as different users even though they are the same users. So yeah, that's why we need user ID tracking. Now user ID tracking in Universal Analytics, you used to do it by going to views, then creating a separate view for the user ID, and that data would only be available in that view. But in Google Analytics 4, it is way better because it applies to the whole thing. Now there are different ways of setting up user ID tracking in uh, Google Tag Manager or in Google Analytics 4. So uh, firstly, what you could do is you could ask your developer, if you're working with a plugin, you could push the user ID into the data layer and then access it from there. So for example, if I were to show you, I could create a custom HTML tag here, and this is what your code could look like, right? And we would set it on trigger, which would be on the login button. So whenever a user click the login button, the user ID would be pushed into the data layer, and from there we could access it. So if I just go to preview, now this won't work for me because I don't have a e-commerce plugin installed or a WordPress plugin installed. So this is just for demonstration. If I go to about, and if I were to just click on this login button now, go back here, yeah, after the click, the message event, which I named it as user data, if I were to see here, user ID would be 123 ABC, right? So this is how you could push it into the data layer and then use it from there. And to use it, we could go to Google Analytics 4 configuration and edit it here, and in fields to set, you could add row, this as user ID, and this is the recommended field name if you're working with user ID, and then value you could have just taken it as data layer variable user ID, and then this would have set up your user ID using the data layer. But as I said earlier, it's not going to work for me because I don't have that plugin installed. So discard changes. Another way we could do this was by using developer tools. So if you were to go to the website and right click and go to the application, and you would find cookies here, and inside this, again, I don't have it set up on my website, but some websites do have it, and account ID would be provided here. So you could have used that as well. If you go to Google Tag Manager and variables, we have something called as first party cookie variable. So if I were to create that first party cookie, I could have set up user ID tracking using first party cookie. But for now, just to show you, I'll just hard code it here and edit this. Fields to set, add row, I'll add user ID, and in value I'll 123 hard code this value here. So let's save. And now if I were to go to preview, as we know, our Google Analytics setting configuration tag, it works on page view. So as soon as the page loads, it's going to get fired. Go to tag assistance. Yeah. Configuration tag is fired. Name fields to set. Name is user ID and the value is 123 ABC because I hard coded it here. So then if you were to go to analytics and just click on page view, in user properties you would be able to see user ID, right? So this can be then used after getting this. You need to also register it as a custom dimension or a custom metric, so that it can be available for you to use in it can be available to use in tracking as well. So then to register it as a custom dimension, you could come back to your configuration tag, and where we have hard coded this, we could go to user properties and add row, and we could name it as user ID dimension. You can't name it has the same here, and value again we'll write 123 ABC. Save. And then in analytics we need to go to configure, and in custom definitions create custom dimension user. You can name this anything, so I'll just user ID, and scope would be user, and user property we'll set it as user ID dimension. So it should be the same thing as it should be the same thing as this, and user ID dimension. Save. Yeah, I think we'll need to create it again. Let me just archive this. Archive. Then create custom dimension. User ID. Scope would be user, and user ID dimension. Save. Yeah. So now we go to our site and go to preview. You can see that the GA4 configuration has fired, and in it will be our values as well. And we can see our new user properties has been added. So ID dimension value 123 ABC. And if we go to analytics now in debug view, we can see the user ID dimension has been added, and in user properties where we were able to see only the user ID, now we can see the user ID dimension as well, and could perform further tracking, and it could be useful for all future trackings. So yeah, this was all for the video. And one thing we need to keep in mind while working with user ID is that we cannot have information in the user ID that can identify a person. So there can't be any personal information about the person. There can't be their email ID or anything, because it goes against Google's terms and services. So yeah, this is one thing to be careful of while working with user IDs. But yeah, this was the overall gist of the video: how to set up user ID tracking and why is it useful. So thank you.